All right, we are live with Sonic Visions episode 8, and we have a packed house today. A lot of our kind of returning guests. I think we have one new guest that hasn't been on any prior shows, and that's Grover. Grover, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. This is my first time actually being on this or on any Discord podcast thingy. But yeah, my name's Grover Neville. I work for headphones.com. Uh, I've worked for a lot of other people in the audio industry. And yeah, that's what I do.
What got you into hi-fi and high end and that kind of thing?
Oh gosh. Okay, so let's see. My dad was kind of into audio as a kid, and I picked up instruments as a young child. And I he had Vandersteen Model 3s and McCormick amp when I was a kid. And so I sort of was exposed to that when I was young. But the real start for me was I got a pair of Skull Candy headphones to use with one of my keyboards when I'm going to say 10 or 11 from an uncle. And those broke when I turned 12. So then I went to the local Best Buy, picked up a pair of headphones, didn't know anything, was doing research online, discovered Head-Fi, went and picked out a pair of headphones. And the rest is history. I think I went to my first Head-Fi meet when I was like 13 or something like that. Alex Rossen was like, "Oh yeah, I remember you." It's like, we were all like, "Why is this kid wandering around the Head-Fi meet?" Like, got a ride in Ray Samuel's Lamborghini, met Jude.
Nice,
Uh, he
nice.
always feels old. I'm like, remember when we met and I was like 13? He's like, God, don't remind me about that. I feel old. Um, but yeah, so and then after that, it was two channel headphones, all that kind of stuff. Eventually went to music school, was working in the music industry, uh, and also doing some side work for Shit Audio, Odyssey. Worked with Tile at Interfidelity back in the early days, doing measurements and some writing, and worked with Odyssey recently. Was actually kind of getting out of audio. Uh, I moved to LA recently and was working in video game and film scoring. And then COVID kind of blew up that whole industry. So now I'm back, and now I do reviews for headphones.com. So that's sort of my as short as I can make it, story.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I just want to say I appreciate your website and your community, and I'm a regular there, and Taryn and all those guys. Andrew's one of my favorite reviewers, so it's awesome to have you here, and yeah, let's continue the dialogue with everybody else. How's everybody doing today?
This is the first podcast that I've been able to return
Oh,
to since the last
I'm sorry,
time.
Flux. You weren't on a prior episode?
No, I was. It's just
Sorry.
I missed a few in between due to work and also just in general. I've been busy post Can Jam SoCal. And also, I just want to say I'm a huge fan of Grover, and I feel like I've followed him in the audience of watching him over the years. So, as a bit of a fangirl moment here, this will be the fourth time I've interacted with Grover under a different under a different guise, a different setting, and it's fun to interact with he and also everybody else here on this podcast. So that's all. Just a little bit of a fangirl moment.
Same though.
Well,
Awesome.
welcome. Glad to have you, Grover and Flux.
Oh,
Nice meeting you.
likewise.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's start this off with our thoughts on Can Jam. The people we have some people here that were there. Uh, we did kind of briefly touch on this with the last episode, but any further thoughts? Things like LCD5 Carbon, the whole show, new releases. Any thoughts on that?
So I guess I'll go first. I'll say that my flights that I picked allowed me to stay throughout the entirety of Can Jam and even like in part of the teardown as well. Now that being said, I feel like one of the highlights of the show outside of the LCD5 was at least for me, was the Wells audio booth. Not so much because it was, blow me away impressive. It was the fact that was the first time I had ever heard anything from Wells Audio ever. So I was quite impressed with their booth compared to everything else. A little bit disappointing that their booth primarily, but also a couple booths in general. I don't want to name names at this point, but there were a few other booths that seemed to have like a dedicated demo unit that had traveled around a bit too much, and then SoCal 2021 was the one where then the unit finally kicked the dust or like kicked the curb. So that was probably my least favorite part about Can Jam. But because of it being a smaller event due to COVID, it meant that I honestly didn't have any worry about reaching every single booth. So inadvertently, a good positive. I think my couple of things that I really enjoyed were the WA33, the standard edition that the Source AV was able to provide, and then also, is it the Zen Pro, the Dunu in-ear? Yeah. So that one was also quite enjoyable, and then the Shangri-La Jr. I had never been able to experience that before. I kind of wish that I would have been able to try it on an alternative Energizer. The headphone, I wish I was able to try it on a different Energizer. Because I feel like it had quite a bit of potential there, but I'm not sure, how good the headphone is, how good the Energizer is, just because it was an isolated, kind of vacuum item. I guess the other highlight would have been that when I was able to try my LCD4 against the 5, I will say, props for what I heard from the Weiss 502 DAC, at least for what it provided to the 4, which was, familiar territory for me. And then being able to kind of cross-examine that with a first impression of the LCD5, which was quite positive, but, the Weiss was definitely a highlight as well. So I feel like, beyond this point, if anybody wants to ask about something specific that they saw, I'm fine to answer that, either in, PMs online or whatever. But in terms of, good versus bad, all of those things were good. The only thing that was bad was, some of the units that just so happened to disintegrate either in your hands or once you put it on your head.
Cool, that's awesome. So what did you use with the WA33?
So I had an early serial number HD800 with me. I also tried the LCD4 that I brought with me. A couple people had brought their Sennheiser 580s, 600s, 650s. So I tried the full suite on that. And I also tried the Aurora Borealis on it as well. Honestly, I think it's a great amp. It's probably the best thing that Woo makes. a few people here that are in the audience probably feel very similarly. And I'm not really breaking any news with that, but that was very enjoyable. For a DAC and a player, I think there was an Astel and Kern something that was plugged in to the WA33. But by comparison, with what was nearby, the new Macintosh MHA 200, that to me was a bit unremarkable by comparison to the WA33. So I'm just going to hold thoughts on the MHA 200 because I didn't really have anything that could give additional context. It was just, if I'm picking A versus B, where A is the WA33 and B is the Macintosh, I'm definitely going to take the WA33. It was more up my alley. And I'm sure with the potential tube combinations, that would also be great as well, to be able to roll a little bit more than with, I think, what was with the Macintosh.
Did you hear Nautilus?
Oh, yes, actually. Great way to prompt that. So I heard the Nautilus. However, that I was only able to check out single-ended headphones on my end. So I was able to use the Borealis and my Black Silk HD 600, both of which I thought it was okay. I can't really give you a whole lot because it was a packed line at the time for the Nautilus. It was a bit too warm for me, specifically around the mid bass, which I realize, even though the headphones I use generally have a little bit of mid bass emphasis. However, I thought that with the same headphones that I had at my disposal, I actually like the Amson Sound Agartha more. So take that as you please.
That's
personally,
that's the 300B amp, right?
I believe
Yes, the Agartha's
so.
Agartha's 300B. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely more of a fan of that than the Nautilus. Trying to think of anything else. There wasn't. So I guess since we're talking about other things that were recently released that I was finally able to get ears on, in terms of like the what I'll say were unremarkable for me were the Stealth, the Empyrean Elite, the Hrtf P, in a way the Hrtf-D, but because I was using it on that Manly amp, I actually found a great way to use it, which was just turn the bass down about 80% on that EQ knob, and then it sounded fine. And then let's see. I guess getting a second shot at the Voce. I tried it in Can Jam New York. I tried it on Blue Hawaii with a Dave and an M scaler, and in the Dan Clark room there. But for SoCal, I was able to use the Yggdrasil, which was much more familiar for me because that's been my DAC for like 5 years now. Although I recently sold it. And that being said, like I came back to that and it felt a bit more like familiar, a bit more normal sounding, but at the same time, it's just not my cup of tea. I don't particularly enjoy the Voce compared to some of the other e-stats that are available. And I guess one last shout out to the gentleman who there's a quite a remarkable story from Can Jam. I'll keep it short because I know I've been talking for a while. The gentleman bought an HE60, the baby Orpheus Sennheiser stat.
Nice.
He bought a baby Orpheus back in '07, just as he heard rumors that it was going to be discontinued. And the HEV70 that was bundled with it had died within the first year. And apparently the guy had never heard it with anything, with the HE60 with anything else. I think he tried the HEV70 with some other lower end stacks to make sure that it worked because he heard of the rumors. So then the first time he got to hear the HE60 was at CanJam SoCal. And he heard it at the head amp table, which had a Blue Hawaii, and I don't remember what DAC was hooked up, but I could see the emotion of, finally hearing this flagship in its own right, a flagship headphone taken to quite great heights. And, me getting to see that just by passing by was incredible.
That's cool. I really like that.
Really sweet.
Sorry, I apologize to everybody. I just had another question. So, actually, two questions. First is thoughts on LCD5 versus Carbon, and then thoughts on Carbon versus Shang Jr.
Okay. So I feel like for the Carbon, I dislike that I'm having to use these generalities here. However, the Carbon to me seemed more in line with what an Odyssey planar would sound like. However, it still has a frequency response that is unlike your LCD2, your LCD4, etc. It's obviously not the same. So for me, the Carbon was a bit more natural sounding compared to, say, a 007, a 009, etc. However, against the Shang Jr., for me, I would take the Carbon, but I understand why there are others out there who would prefer and just straight up, blind buy the Shang Jr. because you can get it as a complete set with a matching energizer, as opposed to, or even mixing and matching, as opposed to getting the Carbon and then not really knowing where to go after that. I feel that the Carbon had a better tonality and had a more agreeable frequency response to me that didn't seem to exhibit any wonkiness. Sounded more normal. I guess I've mentioned that a couple times now. Against the LCD5, I mean, the biggest thing and the easiest thing to pick out is that it's got so much more driver surface area, and because of the type of fit of being circumaural and also the driver's side being so huge, I want you to think more in terms of a stage and size of like an HE1000, but now you give it an I'll say the Odyssey tone, the frequency response that it has, where it doesn't have any major issues. There's not a canyon around the pin gain area. There's not a 2 kilohertz soundstage scoop with a lot of hi-fi man. And I feel that overall, it's a more complete package in terms of a headphone, but at the same time, with what they had available for energizers, the linear tube audio Z10E, and then also I don't know, so maybe Grover or someone else would be able to help me here. There was some Mjolnir audio energizer, direct drive energizer off to the right, but I don't know if it was a Carbon from Mjolnir or what. So I don't know, but at least for what I was given, I liked the carbon quite a bit more I like the carbon more off the Mjolnir as opposed to the Z10E. I think the Z10E put a little bit too much warmth on a stat that already didn't need that kind of tonal emphasis on it. And against the 5, like overall, I think the 5 was the star of the show, primarily because it's going to be integrated into more systems easier than like potentially uprooting your whole system to then go in the direction of the carbon. Additionally, I think the LCD5 is going to be a bit more comfortable compared to the weight issues that so many people have had with other Odysseys like the X, the XC, the 4, all of them being, 600 grams plus. With the LCD4, it was over 700. But at the same time, it is quite a different user experience where you aren't getting that same laid back response of the previous LCDs. You are not getting a what I can only describe as feeling like you're getting like panel speakers put right next to your ears. And instead with the LCD5, it gave me the illusion that I was hearing something like, it's not in the same ballpark in my opinion, but something like a planar dynamic HD 800. It's not as wide. It doesn't have the same decay characteristics, and it doesn't have the same timbre either. But to me, it did what no other planar has been able to do for me thus far, which was to have a more like complete image from as close to center as you can with headphones, because with speakers you will get a center image, whereas with headphones you can only go so far, but you'll get as close to a center image as possible. And then it seemed to, at least for me, it seemed to be able to go all the way back and start to get some rear imaging as well. That being said, I don't really know if I can say that I am going to sell my LCD4 for the 5. In all likelihood, I will probably end up owning both because they are so different. I don't feel that the LCD5 is a direct upgrade for me, for someone who has loved the LCD4 for like 4 years now, and I will continue to love it. So in wrapping, my section of Can Jam SoCal and how much of a wonderful experience that was for me, I would definitely think like the biggest highlight, and I realized, I haven't said anything of this really up until now, was that my girlfriend was waiting on her flight. She was going to catch the shuttle to then get to John Wayne. And I pulled her back in. I was like, no, wait, you got like a half hour before the next shuttle. So I took her over to the Dunu booth after she had been trying out IEMs and, kind of failing really. And she heard the Falcon Pros, and she spent her own money, which, she's a bit of a stickler, which obviously you all don't know, but me personally, this is a person I spend so many hours of the day, so many days of the week with. She spent her own money on the Falcon Pro. She's like, no, I don't want you to buy this for me as a gift. She's like, I straight up want this because this makes my music sound so amazing. So I think that for me was the most heartwarming thing of the heartwarming event of the whole Can Jam SoCal, was taking my girlfriend back in. She ended up trying out an in-ear. Otherwise probably wouldn't have tried it had I not taken her to the table. And then she was, ecstatic about the purchase. And she's been using them every day since.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Flux, you're a great storyteller.
Well, now I'd like everybody else to chime in, please.
But I really appreciated that. I especially like that HE60 story. That was really cool.
If I was, I'd be a little less identifiable. It's kind of obvious where I work. No.
Right.
Thanks so much.
So any other thoughts?
What's up, Grover?
Grover, do you have any thoughts on Kanjam?
Yeah. It was really quite cathartic, I think, in a way, to see everyone again after such a long time. We had a lot of interesting thoughts because Andrew and I were running around the whole time doing video, so we just barely got to hit all the tables. But I liked that because it was a smaller show, it felt more manageable. So a lot of the people that I talked to said that they were able to see everything they wanted to see and even get second listens. The noise level is always an issue, but was lower than it has been at previous Kanjams. You didn't have to scream at each other to be heard talking, so that was kind of nice. There was more time for one-on-one interactions, or at least smaller group interactions. I remember Flux, I think I was there when you guys were at the WA33 passing around headphones.
Oh yeah,
which was quite cool. That was fun because I haven't heard a 580 in a long time. And it's just it's a nice reminder that you don't have to spend a lot of money to get really good sound, right? So that was kind of refreshing. I think, and Jude said this. I can't remember if we were on the show floor, or if it was during the interview. But he mentioned that for him, because we've spent the last 2 years really without any shows, and because during that time measurements have really been our only way of understanding new gear outside of listener impressions, and because the last 2 years especially have seen a lot of content around measurements, YouTube reviews, things like that, there hasn't been a chance to get your hands on as much stuff. He said that for him, the tube amps and the new headphone releases that were, I don't know, he didn't say subjective, but a little more hands-on, and a little bit more if you plug in a tube amp and then you plug in a solid state amp that's very clean, you're much more likely to hear a difference than if you plug in two clean solid state amps, right? And so for him, he said that that defined the show for him, was just people getting to get hands-on with gear. And I noticed a lot of that. I think that it was interesting getting to hear LCD5 and Carbon again in a show environment, because I spent time with them at Odyssey HQ shortly before I left, and that was regarding the LCD4 thing. That was actually a discussion that I remember Chris Behrens and I had with the rest of the team. Of we can't get rid of LCD4 because it's different enough from LCD5 that it should stay in production. And that was a discussion that was that was had. I think also people are LCD5. I will say this in my experience, and again, I spent some time with it, but I didn't spend extensive time with it. I heard some pre-productions and I heard the final version, but it wasn't like I sat down with it for weeks and weeks. It was a couple of days. But it very much had it had to be paired with the right source. And that Weiss DAC, the DAC 502, is a fantastic source. I really can't stress that enough. It's hellishly expensive, but it is very, very good. And I don't think it sounded near as good on some of the other stacks. So I think it'll be interesting to see what people do with that one, how they pair it. I think it's really good. I'm leaning towards possibly getting one for myself. Obviously, we're trying to get a review sample at the moment, which has been very difficult for reasons I won't get into. But it's good. I think a lot of people will like it. It is not typical Odyssey House sound. But yeah, it's essentially it's flat. It's got ear gain around 3K, and it's very fast and very detailed, and with the right source equipment, it can be very good. I think for me, one of the hidden gems actually, and something that I would look forward to pairing it with was the Ferrum headphone amplifier. So the Ferrum is made by a company called Hrtf, which is from Poland, and they are essentially the team that was behind a lot of the design work at MyTech. And I don't know necessarily. I think someone else runs MyTech, but they're behind a lot of the designs of MyTech. And they were showing a headphone amp there that was really spectacular sounding. I think it had 8 watts at 50 ohms or 8 watts at 60 ohms. And I know Utopia that I heard on sounded amazing. And a lot of Sospara owners were listening to it and were pretty impressed by what they heard.
Grover, a quick question.
Yeah.
Is headphones.com getting a Shandling M30 at any point?
Ask Andrew about that one.
Okay.
But yeah, I have no idea. Here's the other thing too. I'm not as up to date on all the newest stuff from China. So I'm like the worst person to ask about that. But yeah, I'm sure. I'm almost certain I've seen jokes about it in our company Slack chat. So,
All right.
where was I? Oh, yes. So, Carbon is an interesting animal. It's definitely, I thought it was a cool pairing with the Mjolnir. Just because I find some of those Kevin Gilmore designs definitely are more forward in the treble, and to me, with an 009, it's not necessarily my favorite combination. I get why people like it, but it's not necessarily my personal choice. But I thought it suited the Carbon well. It's Carbon. There's a slight dip at 8 and 12K, I think, if I remember correctly, and it sounds a little bit, warm, and it's got a little bit more bass than a lot of electrostats, and so it tends to sound a little warmer. And I thought that was a good pairing that kind of balanced each other out. Shangri-La Jr. was very cool. I hadn't heard that actually before. That was excellent. I think Resolve might be using that as a daily driver at the moment, and I can totally see why, because it's so balanced. I'm not totally convinced that the Hi-Fi Man amp is the best amp for it, but I don't want to bash it without having really heard about anything else, because I did think the setup that they brought to the show was really good. Just spot on tonality. Like the tuning was really, really good. Amps and sound was cool. Everybody knows I like amps and sound, so whatever. But apparently, I didn't know this, but Justin blamed me apparently for the Agartha, because I asked him when he brought a Rockwell. We were hanging out at Alex Rawson's place, and I listened to the Rockwell and I said, "This is pretty cool. Have you thought about doing a 300B one?" Just because it's sort of like, well, everybody does a 300B amp when they're doing this kind of thing. And so that was apparently I instigated that. And I have to say the Agartha was probably my favorite amp at the show. It's interesting actually, Flux, that you mentioned that you felt that it was possibly more neutral than the Nautilus. But I thought that to me, DHTs like that just sound more correct in terms of like not having any sort of harsh, weird junk, which to me, I've never been a fan of KT88s. So
Ditto.
Yeah, they're just even when you try and strap them, they're still there's too much gain, and they just sort of sound lumpy, and I just don't think they're very interesting tubes. And Justin, has been a 50s and 60s hi-fi guy for a long time, and I'm kind of more of a 30s and 40s. Like I'm like, give me an old classic Western Electric or old Longevin or something like that, Alltech, industrial Macintosh. Because once you hear DHTs, it's just like, whether or not you like them, there's nothing harsh or no extraneous texture. It doesn't belong there. So
Yeah,
to me,
I
that
guess
was
I'm sorry to interrupt, but because
no,
it's
no, no, fine.
relevant to the Agartha discussion, for reference, my home setup is using a Eddy Current Studio T, and then
Ah,
my previous experience was more with 2A3s in
mhm,
what I prioritized in a higher end amplifier and what I seem to enjoy. So
gotcha.
now having multiple data points of KT88 amps, no matter what is surrounding them, it seems to be a pattern where I'm not enjoying them as much. I do apologize for interrupting. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, no, 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 not at all. No, not at all. That was I'm totally here for the dialogue. So you
Okay.
get it then. Yeah, actually, I think you mentioned that you had an eddy current at the show. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so you know, there's just a thing that DHTs do, and whether, you know, there's a lot of theories as to why. You know, you can look at the curves, and the curves all, of course, look great on 2A3s and 300Bs. But the reason as to why, um, you know, we could talk at length about, but essentially DHTs just have a total absence of what I hear with not all, but a lot of transistors and many pentode and beam tetrode tubes, which is that there is an artificiality and that expresses itself as harshness in the mid range, upper mid range, and treble. And DHTs, the first time you hear one, or a good one, not like the 300B amps that are like soupy and, you know, flabby, but like a really good one, is you're just like, whoa, is that actually what treble and like upper mid range sounds like? It's like there's no white noise, there's no compression, there's no graininess. It's just totally smooth but super detailed. And to me, the Agartha channeled that, and that's really, for my taste. If I were to buy an amplifier for enjoyment for headphones, I think Justin, you know, really nailed it. And of course, the interesting thing I think that is would be apparent to someone who owns, you know, something like one of the really nice eddy current amps, which are also really good, is that that tonality to me is, yeah, I think more. I don't, you know, whether you want to use the word accurate or correct or whatever, those are all kind of loaded terms, but I think it is less, ultimately less colored. Um, to me, there is a slight mid-range coloration in a lot of Justin's amps that comes from strapping tetrodes as triode, and then, you know, trying to push out a lot of power through an output transformer. Whereas the bass on the Agartha sounds more extended, which is interesting. You'd be like, well, it's a 300B. It's not necessarily the highest output power tube, but it has huge bass, you know, on some fairly hard to drive headphones, which I think
Right.
is just telling. DHTs are just, you know, it's the OG magic. um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, other than that, I mean, it was nice to see everyone, and LCD5 was, you know, was the highlight for me, even though I've heard it. I think what remains to be seen is how it's going to play with source gear that is not a $10,000 Weiss, you know, all in one. I think
So
it's going to be
what if I
tricky.
instead what if I
Go ahead.
instead say that somebody needed to pair the Weiss with that Xyle HM1 headphone amplifier that was at the headphones.com table?
You know, I listened to the Zoll for about 2 seconds, so I really don't know how it sounded on, I don't know, some cheap, let's say, headphones or something like that. So I didn't really, which I didn't know either. So I don't really have a handle on how it sounded, but yeah, you can be in the crew that says LCD5 only $20,000 stack.
I mean, I'm basically there already. It's just now I need a solid state amp to keep up with the studio tribute.
I can't see any of the eddy current stuff being a, you know, a bad match with the LCD5. My experience with it at Odyssey headquarters, which doesn't have, you know, a small selection necessarily of different things. I didn't try it on everything we had there, but was that it played pretty well. You know, it wasn't picky with amps with differing output impedances. You know, it's not going to be LCD4 where it likes OTLs quite in the same way. but it wasn't as hard to
Right.
drive as the sensitivity rating might have led me to suspect at first. I found it pretty, it played well with lots of things, but it did seem to be pretty picky. And I really like the guys from LTA are really sweet folks and wonderful friends of mine. But I would say that the more I hear the LTA gear, the more I tend to, say that it wouldn't be my first choice, unless I felt that I was trying to maybe tame a pretty bright system. Um, I can definitely hear, I don't want to say a loss of resolution, but I don't think the LTA gear is necessarily in the same category as really good, true tube stuff if you're looking for that kind of sound. It's pretty
Yeah.
warm.
I
Not in
did
like
forget.
not like an obvious mid bass way, but like it's
Right.
it's very rounded. It rounds the transients out a lot.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of the E stats that tend to get paired with the Z10E, to me, I feel like that was a good match. I didn't have them on hand, and I've kind of ditched the E stat path, but I
Yeah.
think for someone who's looking at a bit of a Swiss Army knife, it is an incredible tool to be able to pair with an E-stat and some various headphones if they all kind of line up in your wheelhouse.
It
Maybe I
also
can.
Because
it does speakers too, doesn't it? And yeah, please,
yeah,
Lana, go ahead.
pretty sure. Yeah, Lana owns one, so
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that at the Hrtf meet I was at, someone did bring a Z10E, and there were several electrostat headphones floating around, like the 009. I forget
Hmm.
what all was there, but when I threw it on the Z10E, I was not that impressed with it.
Hmm.
hmm
Actually, I felt it made a lot of things brighter, and the guy who brought it was actually using it with a Carry Audio, aka DAC streamer. So it wasn't like it was a cold source gear. But yeah, I just found it to be kind of strident in the treble. I wasn't feeling
Hmm.
it. It wasn't my jam. It wasn't until I tried all of my dynamic headphones and my Abyss TC that I had with me that I was like, oh, this is nice. And that's when I did start finding it wasn't, as bad as I thought it was. That sounds horrible to say. And I
no,
have
but a lot
heard,
of those first impressions can be can sway you so much in one way or another. But yeah, please continue.
right. So I bought the amp and I don't regret it at all, but as soon as the Odyssey Carbon came out, I've actually heard a lot of people say, oh, like we tried electrostatics with the LTA Z10E that was there, and like we weren't crazy about it, but throwing like non-electrostatic headphones on it, we preferred it more that way. So I kind of wonder if it maybe suffers a bit from the same thing that the Audio Valve Solaris suffered from, where it maybe was trying to do too many things and didn't equally excel at all of them. Uh,
hmm
but yeah, I am still waiting on my Klipsch Heresies, but that is the amp that I plan to throw on them because it's not a super, super powerful amp, but really good for efficient speakers. So I'm kind of just waiting on that because when my Klipsch Heresies get in, I'll be able to tell you all how I like it with the LTA Z10 because
Awesome.
at my local Klipsch dealer, I heard the Fortes and the Heresies with a Prima Luna amp and a Prima Luna DAC. And I anticipate that combo to be a bit warmer because, as you all know, I'm running a Bricast DM3 into my LTA Z10. And um, I'm kind of wondering what the difference will be coming from a tube and a tube DAC, but I mean, hopefully it'll be good. If not, then I'll try to fix it.
That's wow, Fracassi. That's a cool stack. I agree with you though. I think designing designing electrostatic amplifiers is sort of its own unique challenge, right? Like it's not easy because the amount of voltage you have to swing rules out a lot of output devices. And then with the specific topology that LTA uses, it's licensed from a guy whose name is David Burning. And his circuit is essentially it uses transformers to carry to carry carrier waves, which are sort of like a it's not switching. Well, it is switching, but it's not the same quite as like a Class D switching thing. But it's sort of like it's almost like tubes, but in Class D. If
Interest. Oh no.
Oh no,
Fighting.
we lost Grover.
That was really interesting.
The Z10E and the Solaris are step-up designs, so they use a step-up transformer coming out of the power amp portion of it to some extent. In my experience, because I've had good luck to hear a lot of different things, I don't like the sound of a lot of the step-up transformers I hear. I know that the i5 ESL does something a little bit different. Maybe it'll be better, but both the Solaris and the Z10E, or as Lana described, they don't have the naturalness in the top and bottom ends, and they seem to be a little bit maybe mid-forward or mid-focused, a little bit denser in the tonality in the middle, and then not quite as focused or extended to my ears. Now, regarding Carbon, I like a lot of what Flux said. It sounds really good. I'm frustrated that they didn't have a chance to put it on the Blue Hawaii that we had at the head end table, because that is a tube energizer kind of specific belt. That's how I had a chance to hear the Carbon. I definitely think Carbon deserves something a little bit more focused than a step-up tube design. Emolionier's solid-state amp is pretty good, and that was definitely a different take that I also enjoyed.
Yeah, designing electrostatic amps is maybe outside of the kind of this, but yes, Makai is essentially right. It does use essentially step-up transformers to run it off of what is otherwise just a high voltage circuit. And there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that. Like I said, designing a tube-based electrostatic amplifier is actually very difficult because it limits the tube selection you can have. I'm not really sure what Wu Audio is doing in their, what is it, I think the WA22, but they claim that 300Bs are able to get, the 600 or 580 or 600 volt, swing plus or minus that, the Stax electrostat standard is set at. I don't actually see how that's possible, because if you do the calculation on how much voltage swing, two pairs of 300Bs have, it's not 580 volts. It's like 460 or 470 or something like that, right? So basically, to use triodes, or to even use, most tetrads, it's just, you're just not getting enough swing to amplify it. So doing it is very difficult with tubes. And most designs tend to be hybrid. I believe the Blue Hawaii even does have transistor or op-amp potentially parts in it. I can't remember exactly. I'm sure Makai could speak to that. But to design a pure tube electrostatic amplifier is very, very difficult. So, and also you have to consider, most manufacturers wouldn't want to do that because electrostats swing, so like 600 volts. That's enough to hurt you, or to potentially kill. That'll fry your cat. So we're talking about voltages where if a consumer opens it up and starts playing around inside, they can hurt themselves pretty seriously. So there's not a lot of people who want to touch that. So it's an understandable design challenge. I think Carbon ultimately will benefit from the. I would say there's a lot of electrostat amps which. There's a difference between things that are harsh or bright or forward, because they're tuned to kind of be sort of, bright sounding or forward sounding, and things which are sort of voltage starved, and ended up sounding kind of strident because of that. I think a lot of electrostat amps will tend to sound a little bit brighter, just because there's so much voltage demand. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing with Carbon, because it's actually more efficient than a lot of electrostats on the market. And so it's going to be an easier load, and it also is a little bit warmer. I think it'll suit a lot of what's available at the moment. I haven't tried it with an Energizer, but that would be an interesting thing to play around with as well.
I'm hoping I can speak to that, as I've got one of the millionaire modded energizers from Vega to Spitzer, but I also run the Brocasti DAC. I'm hoping to have some success with that, as I, like a lot of you guys mentioned, carbon just sounded more natural to me. Kind of like how you talked about the directly heated triodes having just a more natural and correct top end. I like and enjoy 009 on my tube amp, but when I switched to carbon, it was just something that sounded more proper to my ears. Not for every genre of music, but enough that I think it would complement my 009 enough,
Yeah, for the
for
program
purchase.
material that you listen to. Yeah, yeah. I think it's also important. Yeah, that's a really good point, Mikai. Is that the program material you listen to is going to suit different things. And Carbon, this may or may not be verified by third-party results, but my understanding was that Carbon has a resonance down around 32 or 34 hertz. So it does have some impact in the bass. And if you're going to have dips in the treble, having a dip around 8 or 9K, and then having a dip around 12K are really not going to be bad at all. It's going to be pretty pleasing. It's going to allow you to listen at a higher volume and for longer periods of time, and it's just going to be less fatiguing because those are areas where our ears are very sensitive. But yeah, Carbon has definitely got I would say a perceptually warmer presentation than most of the electrostats on the market.
I would agree.
And yeah, I did speak with Justin just now, and yeah, so BHSC is a solid state up until the output, and then we run vacuum tubes on the output stage. So it is a hybrid design.
Yeah, it's there's, like I said, a lot of design difficulties in making an electrostatic amplifier. Just that level of voltage, to do it in a tube amplifier is extremely difficult. You basically are limited to a very small selection of triodes, and then even within pentode or beam tetrode lands, you just don't have a wide selection of tubes you can use, because and the tubes you can use that can swing in a voltage are probably going to be tubes that don't have very nice curves. You're going to be like, well, this one has low enough impedance and it has enough power, but the curves are pretty ugly. So at that point, I would rather have a big transistor amp. But that's just my personal take on it. So it's a challenge. I respect any designer who's willing to take on the challenge of making a good E-stat amp, because it's not easy.
All right. Do we want to move on to our official topics now?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I know we're we haven't really even got into them. So the first one is regarding headphones versus speakers, but specifically the evolution of the technology of each device. There was a video that on the Abyss channel, and Joe mentioned something about how he felt that headphones are evolving faster than speakers. The technology, I assume he means the technology's evolving faster, and the sonics and the quality and that kind of thing is evolving faster than speakers, and maybe speakers are a bit more stagnant compared to headphones. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I'm not
I have a lot of
qualified enough, but I have a theory.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel as though, for example, if you look at Klipsch, like the time between like when they released like the Forte 1, the Forte 2, the Forte 3 and 4, like okay, there was a smaller gap between Forte 3 and 4, but before it would often take a very long time, like years and years, but I wonder if this competitive nature in the high-end headphone market is pushing companies, like as soon as they drop a flagship, like, okay, we have to work on another flagship, we have to outdo ourselves, because I kind of get the sense that that's what a lot of people are doing. Like it almost just feels like a race to the top. People just want the newest, the better, that slight bit more resolution, more, just more. I guess more is the word that comes to mind. And um, it seems, due to its size, the compact nature of headphones, even though there's a lot of tech going into it, it just seems like easier almost to do than, like, okay, we just released the flagship speaker, now let's get back to the drawing board and create like another speaker that's better. It just seems I see that more happening in the top of the line headphone world right now than speaker world, where I just see speakers having a longer, like, lifespan before the next iteration of the model usually pops up, and that's just what I've observed. I'm just theorizing that that might be causing headphone technology to evolve faster, assuming it actually is. That more qualified people can chime in on that.
I so actually I do want to chime in because I feel that I'm at a young enough age, at least when the what I feel was my learning of the headphone landscape. I promise I'll keep this one shorter than my previous segments. So I feel that headphones as a whole are evolving quicker, primarily because of the interest um, in a younger generation of those wanting to get higher quality audio.
Yeah, that too.
For instance, like high school, undergrad, college, or collegiate, or university, those people and those individuals who want higher quality audio because they are interested in something, but they can't necessarily spring for speakers because they might live in a dorm, an apartment with their parents, or some other type of living arrangement where they aren't able to use speakers, but they are able to use headphones.
That was my whole
And
childhood.
yeah. And I think that because of the use case being there and that there are more potential customers where they would be using headphones as opposed to speakers, that is also then necessitating um, on the companies like Odyssey, on the companies like Abyss, and so on, Hi-Fi Man, that there are there is a desire to continue to be at the forefront of headphones. So I think there is a necessity to experiment more, to try to innovate more within that closed space of headphones, as opposed to, and I don't mean this as a blanket statement, but as opposed to speakers, which can seem, from my point of view, can seem to be mostly figured out due to previous iterations of measurements, of speaker design, of that whole audio engineering aspect of what makes a speaker sound good in a particular room. I'm not saying that speakers are 100% solved. I just think that at the moment there are more known like positive good paths with speakers due to measurements from I would say at least the last 50 years, compared to where headphones, I think there's more of an understanding that they're like you are allowed to have flavors in headphones just as much as speakers. For example, you can have anything from um, I'll say a Hrtf to a Genelec, or as I was told, it's supposed to be Genelec. Either way, the point being, you can have all of your flavors there, but the use case, I think, fits, at least at the moment, it seems to fit an older, or not as potentially booming crowd. And with our current like online focused interactions as of late, it has necessitated more focus towards the personal side of audio, where something can be at the most portable or transportable, and at the very worst, it's a desktop setup that you can enjoy while you are working from home, while you are completing your lab reports, while you are doing X, Y, and Z, catching up with friends, relatives, etc. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, you mentioned some things that I didn't think about, and for example, when I look at speaker reviews, I just keep referencing clips because I love them and I grew up with them, but I know, like, when I was looking at Clips reviews, I saw a lot of people that said, "Oh, I first heard an earlier iteration in the 80s, and I've been wanting them for 30 years. And now that I bought them, like, these are my speakers for life. I don't plan to upgrade." So I feel as though a lot of people buy a good set of speakers sometimes, like, once or twice in their lives, and then it's like they're said and done. And, on a shelf, you could fit a lot of headphones, so they have that sort of collectability. You can have any sort of flavor of the day going on. Like, I could have 7 headphones for the whole week, and I've been there before, I've done that. Whereas right now, I only have 1 listening room sort of allocated that I need to set my speakers up in, and like, if I wanted to have 7, like, floor standing speakers, I couldn't it would just be a hassle to, take one out, put another one in, like, my flavor of the day speaker would change. Um, so yeah, definitely, I see the appeal that you can just grab them off a shelf, put them on, you can store them. They don't take up a lot of space. I do also think, or at least I hope, that the budget headphone option is progressing parallel to the top of the line, because you mentioned like kids, high school kids, college kids, they might not necessarily have like Odyssey LCD5 or Abyss or Sysfara money. So like, I think a lot of companies are not only sort of battling it out in the high end to see who can be the best for the older crowd that potentially, like, has more money. But I also think that, budget options. Actually, that reminds me, because I feel like there's a popular budget option, and that's Sennheisers, that have been around for decades, and people still swear that they cannot be dethroned. So I
I
kind of
would also then counterpoint with Biodynamic, who have also been making very similar designs for approximately like 30 years now. Albeit there have been some iterations as well. And then also, AKG has been around for a while. In
right.
addition to the previous ones. But yeah, sir, Zach, go ahead.
It's just, I think it's more interesting to see, like, has the technology in headphones evolved really, or are we talking more that the market is evolving? Because I still feel like headphones are in their infancy. Headphones have only really come to the forefront of high end in probably the last 15 years or so. And we probably only have 100 open back headphone companies, of which probably 10 of them are regular names type thing. I don't believe the technology has evolved that much. I feel like some brands have come forward and have their own tastes and tuning and stuff, but the actual technology itself, like, some new stuff's done, but nothing's really been like absolutely groundbreaking or shattering. And it's the same thing for speakers. Like, we're using the same designs from 40 years, 50 years ago. There's been some tweaks and some slight improvements, but everything's been pretty minimal as far as like improvement goes. Like, even with like the key products like that have come forward that are crazy DSP, very unique designs, still haven't really like taken over entirely, even though their technology is kind of new. It's just become a new brand or a new type of sound type thing. So nothing really has technically pushed the bar so high that we've all just adopted it, whether it's headphones or speakers. So I don't know. I feel like the technology is actually moving really slowly. I feel like the branding and the marketing teams are trying to see how much they can charge for products, how much of it's bespoke, how much of it's collectability, and owning something that's kind of flexy. That's a big part of the market as well. I feel like
Yeah.
people want to own stuff that not everybody else can own, and that happens in speakers too. But the headphone market, I feel like, there's the collectability thing and the
Fashionify.
Exactly, that's what I was chasing, man. Like, I think that's a big part, particularly in Asia. We see people wearing like LCD4 at like outdoor events and stuff. It's like crazy. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel the technology is not moving that quickly and growing, but I feel like as branding and marketing in headphones is exploding, and there's new companies coming on board, and it's really interesting to have more flavors and choices. But as far as the tech goes, I feel like Abyss has talked up how they've kind of like, we've completely reshifted the bar. I disagree. I think there's still definitely merits in the stuff from 30 years ago, as people know that I always talk about. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the tech's not moving that fast.
I'm
I
kind of with
actually,
Zach.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry,
kind
go
of
ahead,
with
Lana.
Zach. I'm kind of with Zach because I might not have tried everything that you guys have tried, but I've still gotten around to Headfi meets, and I've been to New York, and I've demoed headphones there. So it always seems to me like the premise of a new, better performing headphone on the horizon just gets people really hyped up. For example, I had the Empyrean, and I always liked them. I knew their shortcomings because a lot of people would come at me being like, "Oh, you didn't know their shortcomings." Yes, I did. You know why I held on to them for so long? They were pretty. They were Yeah, they were pretty. They were like the ultimate bougie flex can, like if like the epitome of just beautiful headphones. And when the Empyrean Elite rumors started circling around, I sort of had a moment of awakening. I sold my original Empyrean with the anticipation of buying something that I have never even heard before, that wasn't even released yet. And I sort of said to myself, Lana, what are you doing? Like, you don't even know what these things sound like. You don't even know if you will like them. You are just boarding the hype train because, there's something new on the horizon and you're hyped about it and you think that, oh, it'll be at least 10% better than, my originals, and that's gonna be worth another 1,000. And then I just sat myself down and I said, let's just buy some speakers and be done with this for a little bit. Like, let's put this on pause for a bit. So I took the money that I got from selling the Empyreans and I bought myself some Klipsch heresies. And I don't regret it. And like a lot of my friends got the elites, which everyone, when the rumors were circling, people were saying, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be so much better." And for some people it was, and for some people it wasn't. So do I really
If I can piggyback off of Zek's comments, more so than Lana's, no offense, Lana, I think that the incorporation of DSP is currently the avenue that a lot of your newer companies are trying to implement, and they are either passing or failing. I can what I'm in my mind, what I'm thinking of are something like the Smith Realizer, the Odyssey wireless options, and also the Sony and Bose active noise canceling offerings that have been released as of late, those are the ones that I feel are at the moment what feel to me to be pushing the envelope. But I actually agree, and I would say that it's more so because of what Zek mentioned kind of woke me up. Is that it's the market, not so much the actual individual devices that are really doing a majority of the innovating. It's finding out how you can, say an attractive 50 words or less on why your personal audio item is desirable over this other personal audio item, regardless of country of origin or tech, implemented tech or whatever. And when there are so many options, you attempt to try and research that. And when there's more online users using like a live chat like Discord, that'll give you more like quicker results, I do feel that you tend to see more people get caught up in that collection aspect in the headphone space because of the aforementioned, qualifiers.
Well, I kind of sit in the middle. I agree with some of your points, but have a few challenges. What I've been most impressed with isn't really anything that the big companies have done. Status quo for them, business is normal. I still have Porta Pros and they're 30 years old. What I do appreciate is Sennheiser's 650 was like what? I think like $700 when it came out. We did an inflation check. It was $550 when it hit the market. It's $200 now. It's not the same exact headphone, but it's similar. And even the vintage ones are what, $200, $300, maybe even $400. So over time, some of the older tech has become more affordable, which has made that kind of entry point a little bit lower than it used to be. But what's really exciting is kind of like what you mentioned, Flex. The software implementation and even hardware implementation have made gains. Like I started in HeadFi 10 years ago, and I had a DC-880, and the system I had it on is garbage. I heard some of the stuff recently, and I was like, man, this is bad. And I still had like a K501 to hear it on an old headphone. So we see entry-level hardware getting better at a lower cost. We see established, headphone tech that's been on the market for decades kind of coming down in price and being more affordable. But what's exciting are the little guys. The guys like the One phone, I had a chance to hear it. Sounds really exceptional. The from RS Audio, the Borealis, sounds really good. I know that the Mad Economist is doing something with his Talos brand. No, Talos was the V2, but there's a lot of small companies, guys with 3D printers, guys doing the modding who are just experimenting en masse. Even the eShaft and the guys at, I think, ETA. So I think those smaller companies are trying to push the value up while keeping the costs kind of manageable, right? Because the big companies are, as we've seen, hype it, market it, better profit margins, making money. But I'm excited to see where the little guys go. Because you guys remember when ZMF started? You remember when Dan Clark started? They kind of challenged the existing price point, but now they're one of the big guys. They're releasing stuff at, $4,000 and $3,000 like everybody else is. So I'm excited to see what these little companies can do and if they can get enough market share to, really have an impact. Because listening to what they have and the price they're selling it at is impressive, given today's economy and inflation and all that jazz. So for me, that's exciting. Nothing the big guys are doing has really impressed me much because it's hype, but it's the little guys, the little modders and the tinkerers and the young engineers who are getting started that I think are going to be the next wave to really make a lot of changes happen more quickly and more apparently in this space that we're in.
I got a little bit. Oh, sorry, you go first.
No, go ahead. Go.
Yeah, so I just want to see, I would like to challenge our base assumption. Are we listening correctly? Because we all have different ear shapes and sound bounces around inside of our ears and arrives at our eardrums differently than everybody else. It's like a fingerprint. And what's interesting is that all these headphones produce sound that it's not optimized for any of us at all. And to me, it's sort of a strange thing that we're still paying, with headphones in particular, that you're still paying $4,000, $5,000 for something which doesn't even take your own ears into account. So when we're looking at companies like Embody VR, which create personalized HRTF profiles and then allows you to create really amazing spatial imaging, and that is powered purely by software and software plugins, that extracts more value out of your existing gear and can even give you better performance than a higher end set. And another example would be Sound ID from SonarWorks, that can extract incredible sound out of a cheaper set. So my question is, can we question, like, are we even listening correctly? And are we truly getting what we're paying for? Because if we can take a cheaper headset and through Sound ID, EQ it and make it sound 3 times its price point, or if we can apply HRTF, custom HRTF functions by scanning our ear and then creating a spatial imaging that's almost just very similar to speakers. And it's astonishing what I heard a few years ago. If we can do that, can we use that and really build on that instead of just, doing this, iteration stuff, as Makaya said, with the big boy players, paying $3,000, $4,000 for just mild material science and engineering efforts? Because we're not even exploring software optimizations there.
Can I
How does
piggyback
one
off
listen
that?
incorrectly?
Can I have a shot here?
Yeah, let's hear from Nick. We haven't heard from Nick. Go ahead, Nick.
Appreciate it. Everybody's hitting along the fringes, I think, and to actually get into, we could spend 3 more podcasts on just this one topic because it breaks off into DSP Room Correction. Okay, for each headphone, you can listen to it a dozen different ways, and the same goes for speakers. You don't need a dozen different speakers. Even though I have a couple set up in my room, I just hit a switch, I hit another button, and I'm set up. I'm listening to different speakers, or I'm listening to different amps, or a different preamp. It only takes moments to do that just with speakers, the same way you can do it with headphones. We can get into the science of marketing, which comes from not only the psychological, sociological, but also right down to the home studies of humans and where they live, how many are living in a group. People are living in smaller and smaller spaces in more crowded and crowded cities. As far as government goes, they love that because you're condensing your resources into a smaller area. So now speakers are going away for the bigger cities because you just can't wake up your neighbors at 3 a.m, turning your system up to 11. Headphones, you're there, you got it. Speakers, they have been studying and working on those for a lot of years, and they're getting there. There'll never be a perfect speaker or a perfect system for anybody because as human beings, we're all different. Who here likes chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry, or God knows what other thousands of other flavors you can create? So there's no satisfying with any single one without DSP or some kind of correction. You can go from headphones for gaming, headphones for music enjoyment, headphones for even home theater. You do the same with speakers. So we got so many other things going. Then we have the age groups. Age groups, the psychology behind the different age groups all together. You can market to each individual one, but that's a waste of money. So you have to go for groups of them. The older money usually is going for speakers, bigger rooms. They're living farther away from the cities. They can afford or prefer, big home theaters or larger spaces. Because with speakers, I feel they will give you more appreciable sound because they've got the study of the room, the space, the one instrument that's not accounted for. Well, is accounted for, but they can't create it. Nobody can sell it to you outside of, the analyzing the room, treating the room. Some people build rooms just for the sound. There's no opposing walls. They're diagonal, sideways. They're all different. So there's so many different areas. And then we have affordability. Like I think it was Flux. He's saying you can take cheap headphones, and you can find the sweet spot by playing with all kinds of different controls and make them sound like expensive. I say expensive, but it's not really the dollar. There's the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 headphones, But if you're happy with something that can control the sound of a $500 or $1,000 headphone, outside of collecting or just wanting a completely different tonality, you don't need the other headphones. And getting back to headphones, where we're talking about flavors, who here has a wall of different headphones for different sounds, different music, just because you don't want to play with the DSP or whatever. You like what it does for that particular type of music. So there's so much to be researched and studied, but I do think that headphones have a lot farther to go as far as the science versus stand-up speakers or even bookshelf speakers. They really, I think, there's always more to do, but they don't have as far to go as headphones do. I know I just dumped the whole truck, but
No,
I wanted
it's
to.
okay.
I
And,
kind of wanted to piggyback off of what you and Nick, what you and Co said, but just to make it brief, sometimes I wonder if headphones are evolving at a fast rate or if it's the source gear that's evolving because I know Co always loved his beloved Sony MDR Z1R, and then he heard the Verite closed on Shamley. If you could remind me so I don't get it wrong, Co.
Oh, is a Shandling M30.
Yes, he heard it on that. He said it extracted the most. Like, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but he told me that it extracted like the most for you, that was most pleasing to where you felt that you no longer needed something else in your collection. And that to me says more that it wasn't the headphones themselves. I mean, the headphones are, of course, like the main component, but if you can get source gear that can extract the best qualities of something, and if that keeps evolving better, I think that's why we see a lot of people with like HD 600, HD 650s on $10,000 chains because they have figured out that it sounds really good on a $10,000 chain, like as it should. Not saying that everyone needs one, but
No, yes, they need one. They need.
but my question there is okay, so hypothetically then is the HD 600, 650 series just that amazing, or is it just that amazing on a really like high-end chain that can extract like all the juicy scalability out of it that everyone longs for and chases after?
I,
I
I
mean, for
think
new
another
people, it's
another
still the
good point is
recommendation.
just the digital aspect. That's my only comment here, is that like digital has only. I'm not going to say it's only been around for X number of years because there's been CDs for a while now as a mode of digital playback. But in terms of file playback and truly understanding what each component in a digital to analog converter, what that does for the sound, to me that's no different than amp design. That's no different than what we're seeing with so many other aspects that we've talked about thus far, is that that is progressing as well. And because the younger folks are tending to go digital as opposed to a multi-$1,000 vinyl setup, or even going on a smaller scale and just investing in vinyl as opposed to digital. I think there's more people that are into digital in the portable space. And I think that is another factor that plays into how people are either gravitating towards or necessitating that market for headphones or speakers against the other. Sorry, listener, go ahead.
I don't even remember what I was going to say. It's fine.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, buddy. It's okay.
I'm just going to provide maybe an insight from a manufacturer's perspective. Not that I am a manufacturer of audio gear, but there is no technology police there's no central place where they look at companies and they say, oh, you're not producing technology that is high, is of a high enough spec for us yet. This is not approved modern technology. There's nothing like that, and there hasn't been anything like that since Mama Bell, Western Electric, division, or EMI in the United Kingdom, or any of those kinds of companies went away. Right? There's no central anything to this. Like Apple or Harman maybe have audio labs, but even those audio labs are not. There really is no like what is high tech, right? Because Zach is totally right. Since about 1976, we haven't really had any advancements in material science or construction of speakers that it's like this stuff is unknown, right? We know how absorption and diffusion work. We know how cabinets resonate. We know basically how drivers function and FS functions, and we know how electronics, function. We've had transistors, we've had tubes, we've kind of got that all sorted out. But do you know that, right? So it's more about the individual companies that are involved in this, right? Like someone like Harman obviously has enormous resources to produce very interesting research, or to produce lots of, HomePod type speakers, or to produce, Galaxy Buds or whatever. But you don't see Harman making tube amps anymore, right? So this idea that there's anything that's on the forefront of audio is simply not true, right? Everything that is happening in the audio industry is about implementation and margins of error, right? It's about a thinner diaphragm. It's about a lower impedance electrical trace. It's about a circuit which accomplishes X damping factor or output impedance with a more efficient part, or a particular sound, right? Nothing we're doing is revolutionary audio, and it hasn't been since. Well, it hasn't been revolutionary since the 50s or 60s, and it hasn't really been new since the 70s or 80s. So nothing about audio is particularly technological. We're low tech, right? This is a low tech industry. It's also a low tech industry which is dependent on companies. And I will say this: there are more companies which are large and profitable in the speaker arena than there are in the headphone arena. And it's not because of the price of the product; it's because of the age of the companies. Right? Mac Group moves, I don't know, several tens of millions of dollars worth of product in North America every year, simply because they've been around and everybody knows who Macintosh is, right? Now, by contrast, someone like Odyssey or Shit, or even Harman, right, AKG or something like that, they move product also because they've been around and they're old and they're well known. But they also aren't the ones who are producing what we think of as being sort of the top gear in our industry. And it doesn't have to do with research, right? They have massive amounts of resources and research and knowledge. It has to do with what is interesting to them. And I can't remember who made the point, but it is true that in audio, because what we're doing isn't particularly high tech, that the guys who are producing the things which are going the furthest down the rabbit hole, right? This is the well, you can't even really make a good car analogy, because at least a Bugatti Veyron is like sort of teaching you something about engine technology. But really, the people who are making the most expensive headphones, they are making them that way because they're showing that they can take the execution of the product to that high of a level. It's like, okay, cool. You can build a really good planar magnetic headphone that has a nice even frequency response. It has good transient, measurements. It has a low distortion. It's a very fast moving diaphragm. The impedance is very low. You can do all that. But to do that, and then to put it in an enclosure, and to really tune it, and to make the ear pads, and to get it to sound good, like to really make that product sound good, it takes a long time. And it's all about the implementation. Zach was totally right. None of it is about the technology. Right? What is new technology? None of it's really new. What is new is potentially the Hrtf thing. Now, I don't think that's there yet. And the reason why is relevant to Nick's point, which is that speakers, and there's, speaker companies have the same thing, right? Where there's not necessarily, some there's no, Mama Bell who is telling everybody, hey, we've just literally created a new alloy and you're now all going to use this for, trace pattern. And that is literally the standard for at least the Western Hemisphere, right? There's no company that's doing that. But what is relevant about HRTF, and I think HRTF and spatial audio is to headphones what home theater was to speakers back in the 90s. What's important about that is, first of all, the technology isn't quite there yet because, one, we haven't really figured out a good way to do it's still very computationally expensive, and we really haven't figured out a good way to make a true HRTF. So I think what people are discovering now and why there's such a rush on flagships, one is that the companies are mature enough to begin producing headphone projects. If you've only been around for 10 years or 6 or 7 years, your company has just had enough time to have a project that takes 5 years to create, right? For a company that's been around for 40 or 80 years, having a project take 5 years is nothing. It's like, oh, well, everything we work on takes 5 years to develop, right? Whereas if you're a company like Dan Clark or ZMF or even Odyssey, a project that takes 5 years to develop, that's half the lifespan of the company at least, right? So you learn a huge amount. There's a huge amount of institutional knowledge that's put into play there. And you also have to understand that this is not something that is done at zero cost, right? You have workers that need to be paid. You have yourself that needs to be paid. You need to eat, right? You have to pay your taxes. You have lights that need to stay on. You have equipment that needs to be paid for, all of that kind of stuff, right? So while a lot of people tend to see, and I'm not defending, $6,000 and $8,000 and $10,000 flagships coming out regularly, you do have to understand that these companies have just become old enough to do projects which do take longer, more resource-intensive design processes, and that they are charging what they feel they need to charge to get that money back, and to make a profit, because they're all in business to make a profit, of course.
That's the nature of business. As they mature, as
exactly,
they
right, yeah.
develop, as they further R&D, they get to the point where they're ready to recoup, and they've earned, the right to ask that based on everything they've invested over the years.
Yes, exactly. So, and then the other point revolves around why I don't think HRTF is ready yet. And I wouldn't really call this technology. I would call it implementation. So in that sense, I agree with Zach. But it's how much of what we hear is really captured in a frequency response chart. Now, if you ask someone like Mad, he'll say everything is there. We just haven't figured out how to interpret it. I tend to disagree with that. But whatever your take on it is, I think the truth of the matter is that an HRTF equalized headphone, which is, I don't know, say K371 or an HD, 580 or whatever. Nobody's going to hear that equalized to the curve of an LCD5 or an LCD4 and say, yeah, that sounds exactly like that headphone, right? I've not met anyone, even the most objectivist, who would ever say that. And the reason is because they don't, right? Why is that? Well, there's a lot of things that are at play here, but partially our ears are better at hearing through our own personal, ear curves. And that's, the audiology backs this up. Our ears are better at hearing through that curve. And also the understanding of why things sound the way they do is not yet as sophisticated as it could be. And that's one of the reasons why HRTF is still such an interesting frontier, because it's one thing to try and sort of implicate a frequency response HRTF. It's totally another thing to try and implicate phase or transient response or dynamic response, because these are all things that our ears do as well, right? They compress, they de-reverb, they do comb filtering, they do, like, our ears do all these other things that are not solely frequency related when we hear. And my point in, try not to get too off topic, but my point in all of this is that what is still very crude is our understanding of exactly how all of this happens, right? And how it affects how we hear. But one thing that I think is clear is that we tend to hear more similarly than people often give us credit for. Now, we have very different preferences, but people tend to have much more similar internal curves for how their hearing is interpreted, right? How their cerebral cortex interprets what they hear than most people suspect. And the other data point is that none of these companies have any sort of centralized, right? It's like everybody's working in these little silos. It's not like, oh, the grand scope of headphone technologies come forward. It's like, no, all the headphone technologies we use were all developed either in the 1930s and 40s or in the 70s with planar magnetic and electrostatic, right? But they've all existed for decades. And it's a matter of how far can you take something rather than, I don't know, how high tech it is, right? And I think in that sense, it's much more easy to view it as a contextual thing, right? Because ultimately, in personal audio, which is a low tech field, we're talking about preferences, which I mean, where's the metric when you're talking about preference? Harman is an attempt to create a metric, but I tend to be much more on the side that the idea of headphone technology, if you want to actually talk about technological development as something where it's like this is a new and maybe revolutionary aspect of this industry, is completely going to be in the software realm, right? We're super unlikely to see anything in the hardware realm, which is a new. And in that sense, we're really no different than speakers, right? The only difference is that the age demographic is a little bit older, and speakers, perform more like furniture than headphones do. But other than that, it's really, I don't actually think the two industries are spectacularly different. Just the demographics and they have less online presence than we do. But
Well,
if you
there
dig
is one
into it,
exception. There is one exception when you talk about technology. For IAMs, I think companies are now starting to really execute for high-end bone conduction implementation. So that's like the
yeah,
one
I'll agree
new
with that.
aspect.
Yeah, I'll agree
Yeah,
with
but the
that.
rest of it, yeah, I
Absolutely.
totally agree. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff with software, and I really want to see that really mature and evolve because customized HRTFs, that's really, really cool. But right now,
They
we're
can be
just,
extremely good.
yeah, we're barely in the first inning, so we've got a long path ahead.
I feel as
Absolutely.
though my life has been a lie for a bit because I know the costs that go into making headphones is not just for technological advancements. I know where it goes. I know that it feeds people. It keeps costs. It covers the costs for running a business and all that. I just for some reason, I guess I thought there was more technological advances as new things got released. But then like, I guess it makes sense hearing you say that they're basically taking recycled older concepts and they're just
Mhm.
seeing how far they can push that envelope. S- So, like, that makes total sense to me now because now it actually makes sense. Like, it's not that they are so much creating new concepts, new ideas. They're just pushing the envelope. They're raising the bar. However, like, I still say that pushing that envelope, raising that bar, can be seen as an advancement of an already pre-existing concept. However, like, I do wonder when certain things will get abandoned or maybe not even fully abandoned, but like you guys were saying, when newer technologies will come in and then, the natural order of things will like dictate that those things that'll be in their infant stages then like newer implementations will push those bars further. Those, it'll just keep sort of progressing pre-existing ideas, technologies, notions, and so yeah, I guess maybe we aren't there yet, like some of you guys have said. Um, but I am excited to see newer things rather than just old ideas being recycled and constantly, I'll make this like 2 or 3% better than it was a few years ago and that sort of thing. Like, I would love to see newer technologies emerge and become more mainstream and accessible.
I
Can I
think
really quick
as
just piggyback off of kind of Grover and Zach real quick?
Mhm.
Yeah, sure.
Um, I feel like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel like this is going to end with more of a question than a statement. But I mean, we all know what goes into making a headphone, right? You got your transducer, you got the chassis, you got the pads, you got whatever damping's going on. I wonder if because the room is taken out of the equation relative to something like speakers, that it makes those parameters seem a little bit more tightly coupled in the difference an individual one can make. So when we see the example I think of is the Empyrean versus the new Elite. They're charging $1,000 more for the new one, and the chassis look pretty much the same. The drivers look mostly the same. The pads seem mostly the same. So I guess I wonder if because the room is taken out of the equation, which is a massive part of the equation for speakers, that those individual parameters would be making more of a difference. And thus the amount of work needed to make a quote unquote new product would be less, leading to more products coming out.
So if I may just insert really short, he'll be really short. The relative performance of a headphone as we think of it or understand it as like a audio thing, like, oh, this headphone sounds XYZ frequency response, has this much distortion, or is this resolving, whatever, has nothing to do with how they're priced. There's no relationship
of course.
between the price and the sound of a headphone, right? And
sure.
It's not, and again, this is why like the little guys making stuff are yeah, you need people who are like crazy passionate, because an engineer, in the 90s or 2000s would have said, okay, we've got earbuds, you can stick them in an iPod, you're done, right? Like they're like, why do you need anything better? I will also say, in North America, to make a metal box with 4 sides and to screw it together and send it off a production line with nothing in it costs $1,000. It costs $1,000 to make a metal box with nothing inside of it in North America. Just as a reference for how much it costs to do design and production. I'm not excusing anything. I'm not saying, I think there's way too many overpriced flagships on the market right now. I think that's a huge problem. I think the price inflation is a big problem. I'm just saying, just for reference, to make a metal box costs $1,000 in North America.
If I could step in just to maybe clarify, I wasn't necessarily speaking too much to the price element. I was more so just trying to possibly understand why I think this question was asked, like gauging the relative, uptick in technological performance of speakers versus headphones, because there seems to be a perception that headphones are going faster by some people. And I think it's more so that just because possibly, again, I don't know, happy to be corrected, that the, shrinking of the number of parameters that make a sonic difference is present, then, a smaller difference can just lead to more products, if that makes sense. Like, because you're spending less time on a single product. Cost wasn't really the big thing I was thinking about.
My thoughts, like with Empyrean and Elite, most of the things are similar, but there's differences in the implementation. Just kind of going over, just speaking with them as a team and other companies. Like Grover said, nothing's really new. It's ideas we've had for a while, but we keep implementing them better. And Elite, I'm one of the people that thinks that it is an improvement, because for me, they evened the low end response, they lowered the overall distortion. The 2 sets of pads are different enough that they complement, whereas the previous set of pads weren't quite as distinguished. The chassis does look, incredibly similar, but there's a little thing. There's a few little details where they were able to kind of nudge it in one direction without a massive loss anywhere else. For me, So I mean, there's still people that prefer something different. But you said about as far as the cost go, I think it's hard for us to comment on the growth of speakers versus headphones, because most of us are doing headphones or work with headphones. Like if we had a speaker guy, or we had a rep from Macintosh, or a rep from Wilson, or a rep from even Teak, they might have insights that we don't see. But in terms of the price difference, is $1,000 worth it? It's hard to say, but as Grover's point is, it's, there's an increased cost of manufacturing, but it's making enough changes in implementation to have net improvements versus differences. Because the passionate people have 50 different revisions. Maybe 3 of them or even 2 of them are worth pushing forward because there's net improvements over other things that they've done. So for myself, the cost is, I don't mind paying the cost because I appreciate the step forward. Even with, I think as Grover mentioned, the LCD4 and the LCD5, what are they, like $500 apart?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That I was particularly impressed with because I do think that they're different enough. What I'm hoping AutoZ will do is take that lighter chassis they developed for the 5 and bring it down to the 4 without the price change, because then they just improve their brand as a whole, right? And maybe the operating cost, the production cost is less as well. So that's what I'm hoping, is that they're going to charge the 500 more, but they're going to take the improvements and filter it down. So now the whole lineup is better than what it was. You know, they're paying less
Yeah,
to
I'm excited
produce
for
it.
that
We're
too.
getting a,
Yeah.
yeah. Hopefully that's the case. But as far as advancements, I think Rover made a great point. When we don't understand how we hear well enough, I'm excited to see what we develop when we understand how we hear. When we know how that process works, what our ears are doing, and how it correlates to what our minds perceive, can we then pursue different materials and actually brand new technology? I feel like now we're kind of shooting in the dark because we don't quite know how it works for ourselves.
Yeah.
Oh, welcome, Juan.
Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to add something in regards to Odyssey's line, probably the future of their line. Before I head out, yeah, one thing is that when it comes to the LCD5, when they did the design work, I do believe they did put a significant amount of resources into the tooling for that design, and they did actually hire an outside firm to get that done. So I'm assuming that what they do here will be trickled down to the rest of their line as they phase out the old design. Now, in regards to the acoustics, in regards to their new magnet system, I wouldn't know exactly, but I assume that to some degree that would also trickle down to the rest of their line as well.
And also, for what it's worth, Odyssey has announced on their front page at Hrtf that they're going to trade in all LCD 4 and 4Zs towards LCD 5, so they're got a new trading program going.
Okay, yeah,
I
that's
saw
actually
that.
insane.
It would be interesting if they could give it that lighter frame that you all are talking about, because as someone who deals with tension headaches and migraines, even the LCD X can get kind of heavy. So it would just be it would just be fascinating to see them implement the new LCD 5 sort of structure onto their lower models, because I always wanted an LCD 4. I I just was always so drawn to it, but I could never deal with the weight issues.
How much does the LCD-X weigh?
I
My
forget.
pair weighs 638 grams with the new pads on it.
Oh wow, that's heavy.
Still too
Hell
much.
yeah.
And to my understanding, that's one of the lighter ones as well, right?
I'm
The
not
LCDX is
sure.
actually one of the heavier ones. The LCDX is
Yeah.
one of the
Oh,
heavier
okay.
ones.
Okay, yeah, because I know Odyssey's line for the most part is between like 500, 700 grams.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
when I
at least in the full size LCD line, obviously excluding LCD 1. I think the
that's a
2,
difference.
right? The 2, the 4Z, and all of the magnesium chassis options are all the ones that are on the lower end of the weight spectrum, and then the X and the or I guess the X3 and the 4 are all on the heavier side. To my understanding.
Yes,
Yeah.
the LCD X, after 5 minutes, I was like, "Oh my god, there is a brick on my head." But the LCD 2, I was like, "Yeah, I could wear this for a while, I don't care." So,
But yeah,
although
I think.
go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. Anyways, I do think that the LCD5, it's not the chassis that makes the difference. I think they actually redid the magnet structure to get that done.
Yeah, and the driver
Um,
size, which allowed them to do a smaller chassis.
Did they
It's
make the driver smaller?
Yeah.
it's totally
Okay,
different.
yeah,
So
that would do it.
everything in that headphone from top to bottom is completely different. The only I don't I don't think there's any parts that are similar other than possibly one screw. And actually, I think the screws might even be different sizes. So other than the
You know,
raw, like actual bar magnets, there literally is zero parts shared with any other headphone.
yeah, I mean, you can see that some of the parts are derivative of the older ones, but yeah, it's a totally different headphone. Yeah.
Right. So to
They
redo
have
the
a. I
entire
mean,
line would be a complete pain, probably.
Yeah, I mean,
well,
if they were to,
not
uh,
necessarily, because they built new production spaces to accommodate the LCD5. More than that, I probably actually shouldn't say. But PM me, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
PMing
Okay.
you right now.
All right, guys. So I'm just going to step in here. We've gone a bit over time. I really appreciate the discussion, though. It's amazing. I feel like with this group we have here, we have a lot more that's on tap that we want to talk about. And I think probably the best thing is to just stop it now, and then we'll continue maybe next week if you guys are up for that. Any parting thoughts?
No, just I'm happy to have such in-depth discussions on the topics that we did cover and be able to expand on them in the ways that we did. I appreciate more of the industry knowledge coming from both Micaiah and Grover. I appreciate the I apologize. I mean this in a fully complimentary way, but like the experienced listeners and consumers here of Zek and Co. And also being able to get input from the rest of the group as well, from Listener and Lana. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. And also glad to have you on for just a moment or two, Juan. Thanks. Great episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so cool compared to when I started the hobby, at least, that, there's platforms like this and streaming is more common and people are able to share their impressions and thoughts easier. I think it's very empowering for the community and uh, y'all are just awesome. And I learn a lot just by lurking and reading.
Yeah. I learn a lot from here, but sometimes I also walk away having more questions than I than I started out with.
I mean, yeah, that's literally the reason why I try to be a part of these things whenever I can, because I always
It's
leave
like
with
I
new
come here
information and
to
new
learn.
questions.
Yeah, like I come here to learn, get a question answered, and then it's like, oh, now I have 10 more questions that I'll need to research or save for another time.
Just more reasons why we love this thing called music.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Amen.
also a great fan of the more in-depth kind of discussions and more technical discussions. I think it's fantastic, and I hope Grover and Flux, Micaiah, all of you guys. I hope you guys will keep joining us and we'll keep having these in-depth discussions, so that way we can kind of flush things out and keep exploring.
Absolutely.
It's great to
As
be
long
here.
as work doesn't get in the way.
All right, fantastic. All right, you guys take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for the
Yeah,
knowledge.
see you later.
All right,
Peace,
toodaloo.
everyone. Absolutely. You guys have a
Bye.
great day.